Her photo stared back at me from the website I built with my own hands. I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter flower, still clinging to my apron. There it was, my rosemary lamb, my handwritten vinaigrette, my exact menu word for word. Except now it was under her name, Chef Rachel Harper, founder, culinary visionary, Women in Food Award 2024. Every word felt like a slap. 15 years of friendship reduced to a stolen credit line. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just scrolled. Scrolling through the life she had stolen my recipes, my story, my work. Even the photo shoot mimicked mine, down to the herbs on the white plate. She had waited until I was too exhausted, too trusting. Then she took everything. I remembered the night I typed that menu. It was snowing outside. The heater groaned in my old apartment, and I had whispered to her, "This could change everything." She nodded. "I'll pitch it tomorrow," she said, sipping red wine from my cracked mug. Then lied. Told me the client passed. Told me to move on, and I did, until now. My hands trembled as I closed the tab. Her name glowed on the screen. Mine was nowhere. I looked at the counter. Same rosemary sprigs. Same chipped mixing bowl. Same woman, but not the same silence. Would you confront the thief, or let your success speak for you? Where are you listening from? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted with everything? The mornings used to feel like ours. Rachel would swing open the kitchen door at 7:15 sharp, always with 2 lattes. Mine oat milk cinnamon sprinkle, hers extra hot, no frills. She'd hum whatever was on the radio, sometimes Stevie Nicks, sometimes Adele. She never asked what I needed, just knew. I'd already be in my apron. The counter floured the air warm with cinnamon and yeast, my hands working dough like it was therapy. The world made sense when I was baking. Rachel thrived on noise, client calls, text alerts, laughter that bounced off the tile. She was magnetic in ways I never needed to be. We weren't opposites, we were complements. She dazzled in meetings. I disappeared into the oven's glow. It worked, for years. We launched Mitchell & Harper at 29. 2 women, 1 dream. Her name came first, she insisted. It just sounds better, she smiled. I nodded. I didn't care about order. I cared about quality. And Rachel? She cared about being seen. Our first office was in Lincoln Park. A second-hand desk, a shared MacBook, a corkboard with handwritten recipes and photos from weddings we catered. Late nights, red wine flower in our hair. We called it building an empire. She liked to say we were sisters in the kitchen, but sisters don't shrink your name on the company site. I started noticing small shifts. Her bio got longer. Mine was cut down to a paragraph. She hired a social media intern, never looped me in. Then came the client dinners. "I'll take this one," she'd say. "You rest. You've been on your feet all day." So I did. I stayed home, worked on menus, adjusted spice blends, made magic where no one could see. Clients started forgetting my name. One woman called me the assistant. Rachel laughed too loud, too long. "I couldn't do anything without Sarah," she said, hand on my shoulder. But the look in her eyes said otherwise. I kept working, kept giving, because I believed in what we were building, because loyalty felt safer than confrontation. But now I wonder, was I building with her or building for her? The shift wasn't sudden, it was slow, like the way a sauce thickens when you're not watching. She started arriving later, 10, sometimes 11. Late meetings, she'd say, brushing past me in heels I couldn't walk in. I didn't ask questions. I just kept stirring, kept prepping, kept trusting. The client calls were all hers now. She'd lock herself in the back office. I'd hear muffled laughter, then silence, then her heels again clicking across tile like punctuation. The recipes were still mine, every sauce, every seasonal pairing, but she began refining things. "Let's try lime instead of lemon," she'd suggest. "No one does mint like I do," she'd say. I nodded. She glowed. I disappeared. One Thursday, I overheard her on speakerphone. A corporate client, big name. They loved our spring menu, but she didn't say we. She said I. I created that saffron risotto after a trip to Lisbon. She lied smooth as buttercream. I stood in the hallway holding a tray of fresh brioche, and something inside me went quiet. Later, I told her I was reworking the winter tasting list. Her reply, "Oh, don't worry about it. I've got something in mind already." Like that, she rewrote our rhythm, line by line. At the farmer's market, vendors stopped asking about the two of you. They looked at me and said, "Still with Rachel, still," like I was the one hanging on. I started staying late, not because I had to, but because the silence gave me space to breathe. I'd flip through our old photos, flour on our cheeks, lipstick-smudged wine glasses in hand. We looked happy. We were, weren't we? Once I found a sticky note on my locker, "You're the reason the food tastes like home." No signature. I never asked if it was from her. I wanted to believe it was. Even when the signs piled up her new solo podcast. A blog under her name. Press kits I never saw. I kept baking, kept believing. Because admitting betrayal meant admitting I'd been blind. And that was harder to swallow than any lie she told. The client came from New York, big budget, even bigger expectations. Rachel buzzed with energy that week. New blouse, new pitch deck, new smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'll handle the presentation," she said, flipping through my typed menu. I had spent nights crafting that list, hand-tested each pairing. My fingers still smelled like rosemary and burnt sugar. She tapped one line and laughed. "Truffle mousse, very you," then added, "But don't get too attached. They might want edgy." I nodded, tried to smile, tried to believe she was protecting my work, not replacing it. We didn't talk for 3 days after that. She was in meetings. I was in the kitchen praying the oven didn't burn what little pride I had left. Friday afternoon she called. Said the client passed. "They want something more fusion." "Don't worry, you'll get 'em next time," she chuckled. I said okay, hung up, and stood still for 10 full minutes. No music, no timer, just the hum of the refrigerator and the echo of my gut screaming she was lying. But I didn't confront her. I baked instead. 3 trays of lavender shortbread I didn't need, because that's what I did, turned pain into pastries. Weeks later, she posted a photo, standing in front of a marble kitchen. Caption, "Grateful to bring my original flavors to life with this new partnership." I zoomed in. My truffle mousse. My exact plating down to the edible gold leaf I only used once. That dish was born in my mother's kitchen under flickering light bulbs and the scent of old gas stoves. And now it had her name on it. That night, I closed the bakery early, lit the lavender candle my mom gave me, opened my laptop, and typed in the domain name that changed everything, RachelHarperCatering.com. The screen loaded, her face, her logo, and my stolen heart, dressed as her triumph. I sat in the dark, watching her become everything I thought we'd be. And that's when I knew this wasn't just ambition. It was theft, deliberate, cold, calculated. But I wasn't done. I wouldn't scream. I wouldn't beg. I would rebuild. In silence, in flour, and with fire she never saw coming. It started with silence. The kind that follows you around. That hums between words. That turns old jokes into empty noise. Rachel stopped meeting my eyes. She'd scroll through her phone when I spoke, smiled too wide, laughed too fast, like she was performing. One morning I asked about a regular client, Mrs. Ellison. She paused. "Oh, she reached out directly," she said too quickly. "I handled it." Handled what? Mrs. Ellison had my cell. She used to call me for every dietary change. Now she hadn't texted in weeks. The next week, I noticed our company calendar had holes, big ones. Whole Saturdays blacked out marked Rachel Private. When I asked, she shrugged. Just networking stuff, nothing to worry about. But I did worry, because I wasn't invited. And suddenly nothing smelled like trust anymore. I opened our shared email just to check. Dozens of new messages, all marked as read. Clients thanking her for the personal touch, asking for exclusive contracts. One email caught my breath. Subject follow-up on your solo presentation. Solo? I scrolled. There it was, an out-of-town tasting, a major hotel group. The menu attached mine, rewritten with different names but unmistakably mine. I sat there, the screen blurring, my chest tight, my thumb frozen on the trackpad. Then I heard her heels tap, tap, tap closer. I closed the laptop, smiled like nothing was cracking. She leaned over the counter, lipstick perfect, phone flashing with new messages. "You good?" she asked casual. I nodded, but inside something shifted. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it wasn't miscommunication, it was a pattern. And I had missed every sign. The missing credits, the solo podcasts, the fancy tastings, the new logo sketches I found in the trash. Rachel Harper, not Mitchell and Harper, just her. I felt like wallpaper in a house I helped build. Pretty, silent, replaceable. That night I called my mom. She answered on the second ring, "Hi, baby," and my voice cracked. I think she's stealing from me. Mom didn't ask who, she just breathed deep and said, "You've known for a while, haven't you?" I had, but now I couldn't unknow it. I started watching her, not in the dramatic way. No shadows, no hiding, just noticing. The way she tilted her phone when I walked by. The way she started locking her office door. She never used to. One afternoon, I offered to drop off a delivery. She said no, said the client had special requests she'd already confirmed. I smiled, then wrote the name down, looked it up that night. Sure enough, Rachel was tagged in their Instagram post. She stood beside their executive chef, holding a signed copy of her menu. The caption read, "A fresh vision from Chef Harper." Chef Harper. No mention of me, no mention of the company. The next morning, I arrived early. The air was still. The smell of yesterday's garlic clung to the kitchen walls. I walked into the back room, opened the filing cabinet we used to share. Her drawer had folders neatly labeled, contracts, press, branding. Not ours, hers. I found a media kit mock-up. Rachel Harper Culinary, new fonts, a rose gold logo, color palette samples taped to the inside flap. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just stared. The woman I called my best friend was erasing me, smiling through it, calling it rebranding. Later that day, she asked if I wanted to join her for a pop-up dinner event. Too late. I said I had plans. She looked surprised. "You never have plans," she teased. Not anymore, I thought. I pulled out my old laptop that night. The one with the chipped corner and the missing E key. The same one I wrote every recipe on since 2012. I started digging, all the menus, the drafts, the timestamps, every version saved in duplicate, every photo, every note. This was my proof, my history. She could rewrite the website. She could post stories with fake captions. But this was mine. I made copies of everything, backups, printouts. Then I created a folder, labeled it in bold, "Truth," because if I ever had to fight, I wouldn't be empty-handed. The thing about betrayal, it doesn't always explode. Sometimes it seeps, like wine into fabric, slow, permanent. I watched Rachel from across the prep station. She laughed easily, tossed basil into a bowl like it meant nothing. Her charm hadn't faded. If anything, she'd grown sharper. Her words slick, her praise curated. She told the interns she built this brand from scratch. And they believed her. Why wouldn't they? She wore confidence like lipstick, bold, bright, uncrackable. One afternoon, I tested her, subtle. I asked about a client we hadn't worked with in months. "Oh, they're not booking anyone right now," she said, slicing tomatoes. I nodded, then checked. They just hosted a tasting with her. I found photos online. She wore our old apron, the logo blurred in the background. It felt like watching someone wear your clothes. but pretend they bought them first. Still, I stayed silent. I watched more, screenshotted everything, built a folder inside my folder. Backups of the truth. It made me feel steady, prepared. One evening, I stayed late long after she left. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, empty counters, clean sinks, fluorescent light flickering above the fridge. I placed my hand flat on the steel table, cold, honest, and I asked myself the question I'd been avoiding. Was I going to confront her, or keep playing along, collecting ghosts? My mother's voice echoed in my mind. Some women fight loud. Some women wait for their moment. But silence doesn't mean weak, honey. It means choosing when to be heard. I didn't have a plan yet, but I had the truth. I had myself. And for the first time in months, that felt like a start. Would you confront now or keep collecting proof? What would you do if your life's work wore someone else's name? I wasn't supposed to see it, but Rachel left her iPad open on the front desk, unlocked, face down, screen dimmed. She was in the storage room, arguing with the produce vendor about basil quality, her voice sharp, theatrical. I glanced just 1 second, just curiosity. And then I saw it. An email thread, subject line, final approval, solo brand assets. Attached a PDF, media kit, not just Rachel Harper Culinary, Rachel Harper Foods Inc. With projected growth charts, her face on every slide, her quotes, our recipes renamed, not herb-crusted lamb, now it was Harper's signature roast. She didn't even bother to change the seasoning list. I read every word, line by line, all stolen, all polished, and under it all my fingerprints. I didn't touch the screen, didn't scroll, just stared as my throat burned. She'd been planning this for months. The blacked-out Saturdays, the pop-up events, the hidden contracts. It wasn't ambition, it was extraction. I walked to the cooler, stood behind the heavy door, and breathed in the cold. The smell of thyme and citrus hit me like memory. I thought about the first time we cooked together, that sticky July when the power went out and we made do with candlelight and a single burner. We laughed so hard we burned the rice. I thought that kind of memory protected us. But betrayal doesn't care about history. It doesn't knock, it takes. When she re-entered the kitchen, her smile was effortless. Did you check the orders for tomorrow? I nodded, but my eyes said something else. She tilted her head. You okay? I wanted to scream, to throw the iPad across the tile, to demand answers I already knew. Instead, I said I saw your presentation. A beat, just one. Her eyes shifted barely, then recovered. Oh, that she laughed, brushing hair behind her ear. It's just for a potential investor. Nothing's final. But it wasn't. I could see it in her posture, in how she wouldn't meet my gaze fully, in the slight tremble she covered with a sip from her cold coffee. Are we still a team? I asked quietly. Her reply was quick. Of course we are. But her smile didn't touch her eyes, and mine never came at all. The gala was supposed to be ours, a food and wine benefit at the Art Institute. We donated tastings before, but this year we were featured. Prime placement, spotlight, media coverage. Rachel insisted we use her car. It's sleeker, she joked, keys dangling from her perfectly manicured hand. She wore silver satin, I wore navy. I let her lead, like always. But when we arrived, there was only one name on the signage, Harper Catering Group. My heart stopped. No Mitchell, no ampersand, no us. I turned to her. She shrugged. Oh, I submitted it that way. It's cleaner. Branding, you know. Branding, as if I were clutter. Inside the booth was staged to perfection. White linen, glass tiers of hors d'oeuvres I created. Menus printed in soft cream with gold foil. At the bottom of each one, curated by Chef Rachel Harper. Nothing else. Guests walked by in silk and diamonds. They praised the food, the plating, her. She basked. I served. At one point, a woman smiled at me. "This is divine. How long have you worked for Chef Harper?" My throat clenched. Rachel stepped in before I could speak. "She's the reason these flavors exist," she said, resting a hand on my arm. Gracious, sweet, and utterly rehearsed. The photographer came next. Wanted shots of the chef. Rachel posed effortlessly, tongs in hand, tilted head, laugh on cue. I stood behind her, half framed, half forgotten. Later, I found myself alone in the hallway near the staff exit. The hum of the gallery lights buzzed above, my heels pinched, my dignity bruised. I stared at the marble floor and thought, this is what erasure feels like. Not loud, not violent, just slow and public, like fading ink. I took out my phone, opened our website. She'd updated the homepage, again. Her bio filled the screen. Mine reduced to 2 lines and a vague mention of creative consultant. That was the moment it stopped being doubt, stopped being fear. It became fact. I wasn't her partner anymore. I was a footnote in my own story. And I couldn't stay silent much longer. I didn't sleep that night. The satin from the gala still hung on the back of the chair. Her voice still echoed in my head. So gracious, so polished. Lies that tasted like wine. I opened my recipe binder at 2 a.m., not the digital one, the old leather folder with coffee stains and torn tabs. My handwriting looped across every page. Ink smudged from long nights, kitchen heat, and grief. Page 38, Rosemary Lamb, the same one she'd renamed as her signature. I touched the paper, my thumb paused over a grease mark. It looked like a scar. That recipe wasn't just food. It was my mother's voice, her wooden spoon, her apron dusted in flour humming gospel while the oven hissed. Rachel had never met that woman. She'd never stood in our cramped kitchen with the flickering bulb, never tasted how silence could fill a room thicker than steam. She took it anyway. By sunrise, I'd made a decision, not a plan, not revenge, just a line I wouldn't cross back over. At noon, Rachel bounced into the kitchen, high on last night's applause. I got a write-up in the Tribune, she beamed, holding out her phone. I didn't flinch, didn't ask, just kept slicing lemons. She watched me. Everything okay? I looked up. I think you already know. Something flickered in her face. Not guilt, not surprise, just calculation. A beat passed, then her voice softened. You're being sensitive. That word, it hit harder than any headline. Because it meant she didn't just steal from me, she expected me to stay quiet about it. Like it was my role. The quiet one. The one in the background. The one who bakes while others take credit. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I turned off the burner, laid the knife flat on the board, and for the first time since we opened our doors, I walked out before the workday ended. Not in anger, not in drama, but in clarity. She could keep the booth, the name, the hollow spotlight. I was taking back my story. 1 plate, 1 page, 1 breath at a time. 2 weeks passed. She didn't call. No texts, no emails, just silence. I checked the company site again. My name was gone. Not reduced, erased. The Our Story page told a clean lie, founded by Rachel Harper in 2010, driven by a singular vision of excellence. Singular. I sat on the floor of my apartment, back against the kitchen cabinet. No apron, no orders, just the hum of the refrigerator and the weight of something breaking. I kept telling myself it wasn't real, that I could fix it, that she'd call and say it was a misunderstanding, but the truth had teeth. I'd been erased from something I built. My menus, my hands, my years rewritten in someone else's font. And no one noticed. No one called, not the vendors, not the clients. I was a ghost in my own story. That night, I went to the bakery down the block. The girl behind the counter smiled too brightly. Rough day, she asked, handing me a cranberry scone. I nodded, then surprised myself by crying. right there, under fluorescent lights and the smell of cardamom and burnt coffee. She handed me a napkin, didn't ask why, didn't need to. I walked home slow, the box warm in my hands. The city lights blurred through tears I didn't know I still had. When I got back, I called my mom. She answered with sweetheart, and I broke. She took everything, Mom, I whispered, all of it. And no one sees me. There was silence. Then her voice steady. You see you. I laughed through my tears. What does that even mean? It means, she said, when the dust settles, you get to decide what's next. Not her. I stared at my reflection in the dark window. Tired eyes, hair tied back, flowers still on my sleeve from something I didn't finish baking. I didn't know what was next, but I knew one thing. Rachel might have stolen my recipes, my credit, even my place in the spotlight, but she didn't get to keep my fire. That belonged to me. The next morning, I flew to Oregon. Mom met me at the tiny airport with a knitted scarf and thermos of mint tea. Still hate airport coffee. She smiled, wrapping me up in a hug that smelled like vanilla and home. We didn't talk much on the drive. The rain did all the filling, soft, relentless. Her house hadn't changed. The same yellow curtains, the same porch swing that creaked when you looked at it wrong. Inside, she lit the fireplace, handed me socks in silence, let me sit, let me unravel. For 2 days, I barely spoke. I made tea, watched birds, sat on the kitchen stool like I was 5 again, watching her bake banana bread. She moved like memory, measured by feel, no timer, just instinct. On the 3rd morning, she placed a photo in front of me. Me, age 27, flower on my cheek, holding up my first catering license with both hands. I smiled. Do you remember who that girl was? She asked quiet. I nodded. She was hungry, I said, for more than food. She nodded back, then find her, not the version Rachel let survive. The whole you. That afternoon, I walked into her pantry, found a stack of old cookbooks I'd left there years ago, dog-eared pages, sticky notes with tweaks. There in the back was a notebook, blank, untouched. I opened to the first page, wrote a single word in the center. Return, not to Rachel, not to the business, to myself. I closed the notebook, heart thudding like it had something to say. I didn't have a logo, didn't have a client, didn't even have a kitchen, but I had time, and something more dangerous than bitterness, clarity. Mom poured me another cup of tea. Starting over is hard, she said, but staying erased is harder. I looked at the steam curling into air, how it vanished, how it rose first. And I whispered to myself, let's see what I become without her. I stayed in Oregon for 8 days. No social media, no email, no news of Rachel. I cooked every day in Mom's tiny kitchen. Nothing fancy, just honest food. Soup that simmered for hours. Bread that rose on its own time. Flavors that didn't ask to be praised. And somewhere between the simmer and the silence, I found a strange kind of peace. On the 5th day, I made my rosemary lamb, the original version. No edits, no substitutions, just how I first wrote it. Mom took a bite and closed her eyes. You know, she said, some people steal recipes, but no one can copy your hands. I stared at them, my hands, calloused, strong, tired, still mine. That night, I sat on the porch with a legal pad in my lap, the notebook from before beside me, the stars above quiet but watchful. I started writing, not just recipes, but stories, where each dish came from, what it meant, who I was when I created it. There was power in it, not the kind Rachel craved, not applause or press features, but ownership, and it felt good. The next morning, I asked Mom if she still had her old camera. She smiled. It's dusty, but it works. We spent the afternoon plating food on her back porch. Soft linen, sunlight through trees, no filter, just truth. I uploaded the photos to a blank Squarespace page. No logo yet, no name. Just one sentence at the top. From fire and flour, I return. I didn't know where it would go, didn't care, because for the first time in years, I wasn't working for someone else's dream. I was planting something of my own, small, quiet, but rooted. And I could feel it already, the slow stretch of something growing beneath the loss. Not rage, not revenge. Something older, something steadier, like dignity, like legacy. Like home, I returned to Chicago in early spring. The city hadn't changed. Same chill in the wind, same bakery on the corner, but I had. The apartment felt smaller, or maybe I'd just grown. First thing I did was pack away the apron with our old logo, tossed it into a box I couldn't label, too many memories stitched into its seams. Then I opened my laptop. The new site was still blank, but my stories were ready, not polished, not marketable, but real. I called it Rooted Table, not Sarah Mitchell Catering, not chef anything. Just a table with roots like mine. Next, I opened a new Instagram account. No filters, no graphics. Just a photo of rosemary sprigs on my cutting board. Caption, no more borrowed shine. This time it's mine. Within 2 hours, I got a message from a local food blogger. Where have you been hiding? I smiled. Then I started filing paperwork. LLC registration, business account, new email. It was tedious, but every click felt like a step back toward myself. I didn't reach out to old clients, not yet. Instead, I joined a weekend farmer's market as a vendor. Small booth, no banner, just food in compostable trays, hand-labeled with a Sharpie. The first Saturday, I brought lemon herb couscous, olive oil cake, and rosemary lamb sliders. By noon, I was sold out. A woman came back and said, "You taste like memory." I went home that night with empty trays and full lungs. There was no spotlight, no applause, just the quiet beat of something real. But not everything stayed quiet. On Monday, I got an email from a former vendor. They congratulated me on the brave rebrand. Said Rachel had told everyone we'd mutually parted ways so I could retire. Retire. I was 40, not done, not disappearing. That word lit something under my ribs. I opened my old shared folder, the one I backed up before I walked away. Emails, menu drafts, date stamps, photos of us in tastings where only her name was used in the press. All of it there. Waiting, and for the first time, I started thinking less about moving on and more about making sure the truth had a seat at the table. I didn't want revenge. I wanted clarity and credit and closure. So I started small. I submitted a recipe to a community zine, just one. But they published it with a feature on local voices reclaiming tradition. They used my name. Not assistant chef, not co-founder, just Sarah Mitchell. It felt strange to see it printed, stranger to feel seen. Then I booked a table at the Spring Artisan Food Fair. It wasn't glamorous. Fold-out tables, DIY banners, but it mattered. I made 3 dishes, each one with a story printed beneath it. No branding, no titles, just truth. A woman in a green scarf read every card. She looked at me and said, "I remember this. Didn't someone else claim it?" I met her eyes. "I created it," I said. Simple, firm, enough. She nodded, bought 2 portions, told me she was a publisher. The next day she emailed, said my writing moved her, asked if I'd ever considered telling my story in a book. A cookbook memoir, recipes and survival, burnt sugar and broken trust. I stared at her message for a long time. And then I started writing. Meanwhile, Rachel's name kept floating around. Someone tagged me in a post from her latest event. New line of sauces, same flavors, same styling, same stolen roots. I didn't comment, didn't message her. Instead, I looked through the photos again slowly, then opened my backup folder. I began organizing it like a legal case. Chronological, menus, photos, emails. One tab just titled Omissions. Every press release where I had been edited out, every caption that once said we but now read I. And still I hesitated, because going public meant opening wounds, meant answering questions I wasn't sure I had peace for yet. But silence had cost me everything once, and I wasn't about to let it do that again. I didn't want to destroy her. I just wanted the truth to outlive the lie. So I called an old client, Mrs. Ellison. She sounded surprised to hear from me. Said she thought I'd left the industry. I told her the truth, all of it. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she said just one thing. I'm planning a summer gala, and I'd be honored if you catered it under your name. I looked at the calendar. 3 months. 3 months to rise again, not beside anyone, not behind, but forward. Alone and enough. 3 months. It sounded like a deadline, but it felt like a doorway. I said yes to Mrs. Ellison's gala. Then I sat in my living room for an hour just breathing. Then the real work began. I rented kitchen space from a local co-op, small, drafty, perfect. I designed my own logo, handwritten, imperfect, but mine. Rooted tables started appearing on flyers, food pages, local newsletters. Not viral, but visible. I sent invoices, made vendor calls, took photos with natural light on my fire escape, posted stories, answered every DM. Slowly, my inbox filled with names I hadn't heard in years. Some asked if I was starting something new. Others apologized for staying silent. I didn't hold it against them. People believe the loudest voice until they taste the truth. One evening, a young chef messaged me. She said she'd interned at Rachel's company, said she found one of my old recipes credited to Rachel, said it didn't sit right. She ended her message with, "Thank you for making space for women like me." I read that line over and over. I never wanted to lead anyone. I just wanted my name back. But maybe by taking it back, I could offer someone else the courage to claim theirs. The night before the gala, I laid out everything. Menu cards, serving platters, cookbook mock-ups with short stories beside each dish. On the last page of the sample book, I wrote, "Some recipes come from fire, some from grief, but the best ones rise from both." I didn't need applause. I didn't need headlines. I needed air, room, legacy, the kind that isn't built on press, but on proof. When I closed my laptop, I looked around my kitchen, boxes stacked, fresh herbs in water, notes taped to the fridge, and I whispered to myself, "She won't see this coming, not because it would be cruel, but because it would be quiet." And justice, when it's done right, doesn't always make a sound. It just shows up. Ready, rooted, unapologetically real. The venue was all glass and light. Downtown rooftop. Gold accents. Long tables draped in white. Mrs. Ellison didn't do anything halfway. She gave me full creative control. "Serve what feels true," she said, handing me the guest list. I recognized names. Some were former clients Rachel had retained. Some were chefs I hadn't seen since we built our first booth together. I read each name twice, then I got to work. The night before the event, I prepped everything myself. No staff, no sous chef, just my hands and a playlist of Nina Simone and Aretha. I chopped onions until my eyes burned, measured herbs by feel, tasted sauces with my eyes closed like Mom taught me. Each dish came from my oldest notebook. Nothing borrowed, nothing trendy, just stories made edible. I plated the lamb last, the same rosemary lamb Rachel had claimed as her signature, but this time it sat beside a folded card that read, "First served November 2015. Original creator Sarah Mitchell. Inspired by Ellen Mitchell's Sunday Table." I placed it gently at the front of the table. No bitterness, just fact. The morning of the event, I arrived early. The staff helped me unload trays. Everyone was calm until the guest list printed. That's when someone whispered her name. Rachel, she was on the list. Invited as a culinary donor. Apparently she'd sponsored the wine. I froze for a moment, hands full of flatware. Then I smiled, because this wasn't her event. This wasn't her menu. This wasn't her truth to rewrite. For the first time, I didn't feel fear when I heard her name. I felt nothing. That was new. By noon, guests began arriving. Heels clicked on marble. Laughter echoed off windows. People gathered around my booth, asked questions, took photos, tasted quietly, then asked for more. One woman said, "This lamb, I had it years ago at another event, but back then someone else claimed it." I nodded. "This version's the original." She blinked, smiled, and whispered I knew it. I didn't need to announce what Rachel did. I just had to show what I'd always done. In the distance, someone gasped. A small ripple moved through the room. I didn't look yet. I just wiped my hands, adjusted the linen, because justice was already in motion and it was wearing rosemary. I turned just as she walked in, Rachel Harper, flawless as always. Cream blazer, gold earrings, confident like she owned the building. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on me. There was a flicker, not surprise, not fear. Just calculation, like she was already rewriting the moment in her head. She made her way over slow and deliberate, sipped wine as if she had all the time in the world. "Sarah," she said, voice syrupy. "I didn't expect to see you here." I smiled, not wide, not fake. "Just enough. Funny, you used to say we belonged in rooms like this." She blinked, laughed too lightly. "Oh, of course you do. I mean, I just thought you'd stepped back." Stepped back. I looked down at the rosemary lamb, then back up. Apparently not far enough. She glanced at the menu card beside the platter, the one with my name, my mother's name. Her lips parted, then pressed shut. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The chatter of the room swirled around us. Someone was praising the couscous. Someone else asked for seconds of the cake. Rachel leaned in. "Look, Sarah, this doesn't have to be." But I held up a hand, calm, flat, final. "You already said enough, years ago, in emails, in menus, in credits you removed." She looked around. Eyes darted to a woman photographing the rosemary lamb, to another guest reading the story cards beside each dish. She straightened. "You know this doesn't change anything." I tilted my head. "Doesn't it?" Before she could answer, Mrs. Ellison approached, her smile wide, her voice bright. "Sarah, darling, would you mind saying a few words before dessert?" Rachel froze. I didn't. I wiped my hands, walked to the mic. Each step felt like soil beneath new roots, not revenge, not performance, just reclamation. As I reached the podium, I caught one last glance at Rachel. She was still holding her wine, still standing near my table, but suddenly very small in the frame. I cleared my throat and began, not with bitterness, not with blame, but with the truth, and this time no one could edit me out. The microphone squeaked once, then silence. Dozens of faces turned to me. Crystal glasses paused midair, forks hovered over plates. I took a breath. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," I said. "And every dish you've tasted tonight came from my table, my stories, and my hands." I looked down for a beat, let the stillness hold. I started cooking when I was 9. My mother taught me that recipes aren't about ingredients, they're about memory. A few heads nodded. One guest put her hand over her heart. I lost my name once I continued. Not in court, not in fire, but in silence. In rooms like this where credit vanished and someone else smiled for the cameras. I paused, saw Rachel in the back, still, expression unreadable. I won't name names, because the truth doesn't need a villain, it just needs to be told. That line landed. A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Each recipe here is printed with its origin, not for ego, but for restoration. Because women, especially women who create, deserve to be visible in their own stories. There was a sharp inhale from someone near the press table. I closed my notes, didn't need them anymore. And if you've ever felt erased, I hope tonight reminds you you can always start again. Even if the world forgets you, you don't have to forget yourself. Applause rose before I even stepped back. Not thunderous, but steady, earnest. It didn't feel like noise. It felt like acknowledgement. Rachel was already gone when I looked again, her wine untouched, her name unspoken. But her absence didn't matter, not anymore, because something else was standing where she used to live, my name, my truth, in full volume finally. Mrs. Ellison hugged me on the way down. You didn't just feed them, she whispered. You freed something. I smiled. The kind that starts in your chest and softens your shoulders. And for the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. I was standing in the middle of my own light, and it was enough. The next morning, my inbox was full. Not spam, not promotions, real messages, real names. Former clients, vendors, catering assistants I hadn't seen in 5 years. They all said the same thing. I didn't know. I'm sorry. I always wondered why you disappeared. One email was from a wedding planner. Said she used to recommend Mitchell and Harper exclusively. Stopped after she noticed only one name showing up. She closed her message with, if you're taking bookings again, I have 3 referrals for you already. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee going cold, staring at my laptop, at this gentle wave of justice washing in quiet but relentless. I hadn't posted anything, hadn't called Rachel out, but guess had. Photos of the rosemary lamb were circulating on Instagram, with captions like, this dish was never hers to claim. Someone had even tagged a local food journalist. And just like that, the silence cracked. The journalist messaged me directly. Said she'd attended the gala, said she'd known Rachel for years. But what she heard during my speech, what she saw on the cards, something clicked. She asked for an interview. I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't about exposing Rachel. It never was. It was about reclaiming space. My name, my story, my work. I said yes, on one condition. I don't want drama, I wrote. I want truth, quietly, clearly. She replied, quiet truth is the loudest kind. We met at a coffee shop near Wicker Park. I wore no makeup, didn't bring props, just my notebook. She listened, took notes, didn't interrupt. At the end, she asked if I had anything I wanted the world to know. I said I didn't come back to tear anyone down. I came back to make sure I wasn't erased. That night, her article went live. Title, The Woman Behind the Recipes. No clickbait, no scandal. Just story. Mine. By morning, it had over 12,000 shares. I wasn't chasing virality, but when truth moves with its own legs, people follow. And for the first time, so did the silence. It didn't haunt me anymore. It held me. Steady, still, and finally heard. The article kept circulating. By the second day, a food blogger posted a side-by-side. My 2016 handwritten menu, Rachel's 2023 press kit. They matched, line for line, dish for dish. The caption read, "Credit matters." Rachel didn't respond directly, but I saw the signs. Her company's Instagram turned off comments. Her bio quietly changed. Founder of Harper Foods became curator of culinary collaborations. Emails trickled in from people we both knew. A photographer messaged, "I always thought you were the heart behind the plates." A former intern wrote, "Working with you taught me more than any school ever did. I'm so sorry I never reached out." The apologies weren't loud, but they were real, and they were enough. Then came the phone call. Rachel's number lit up my screen like a ghost. I let it ring 5 times, then silence. She didn't leave a voicemail. A part of me expected her to show up, to defend, to explain. But she didn't, and that said more than anything she could have rehearsed. I checked her company website later that week. A notice sat at the top. Currently undergoing brand restructuring. Check back soon. No apology, no acknowledgement. But the erasure had begun, this time hers. Still, I didn't feel triumphant. No fist in the air, no wine to celebrate. Because winning isn't about watching someone fall. It's about standing up and staying up when no one thought you would. I spent the next few days finalizing my cookbook draft. 20 recipes, 20 stories, each one a scar I turned into flavor. My editor emailed, "This is going to resonate. You didn't just write food, you wrote survival." I smiled. She got it. That same week, I got a package. No note, no return label. Inside was a vintage copy of Mastering the Art of French Cooking. First edition, dog-eared, familiar. I flipped to the inside cover. One sentence was underlined. "The only real stumbling block is fear of failure. In cooking, you've got to have a what the hell attitude." I knew who sent it, and I knew it wasn't an apology, it was an acknowledgement. But it came too late. I put the book on my shelf, between my mother's bread Bible and my own spiral notebook. Let it sit, let it rest. Some things you don't burn, you outgrow them. Quietly, decisively, and without looking back. By the end of the month, 3 catering offers came in. One from a museum, one from a tech firm, and one from a nonprofit that supported women chefs. I said yes to the last one, because I wasn't building a business anymore. I was building a table long enough for others to sit at. The cookbook got picked up by an indie press. My editor asked if I wanted a foreword written by someone established. I said no. I'd rather have it written by my mother. She laughed, then paused, then said, "That might be the most honest foreword we've ever published." We met in Oregon weeks later, sat at the same chipped kitchen table where everything started. I handed her a pen. She didn't write long, just 3 paragraphs, about food, about me, about the strength it takes to feed people after you've been starved of recognition. When I read it back, I cried. Not from pain, but from being seen. That summer, Rooted Table launched a mentorship program. No press release, just an open email. "If you're a woman in food who's ever felt invisible, we see you. Come cook with us." Within days, we had over 40 responses. Line cooks, pastry apprentices, mothers, grandmothers, girls who'd left culinary school because they weren't loud enough to be taken seriously. I didn't promise them spotlight. I promised them space. And that was enough. One afternoon, while prepping for a workshop, I found an old photo. Rachel and me, laughing, aprons covered in tomato stains. I stared at it for a moment, then placed it in a drawer, not to forget, just to file away. Some stories don't need rewriting, they just need to end. When the first mentorship cohort graduated, we served a small dinner. Each woman presented a dish tied to her story. The table stretched long across a community garden, twinkling lights, paper menus, no logos. At the center of each menu, this table was built from truth. I sat at the far end, watched them laugh, serve, stand tall. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't before. Justice is never loud. It's never cruel. It doesn't need headlines. It just needs to last. And this would. I still wake up early, not because I have to, but because I want to. The light in my new kitchen hits different. It's softer, filtered through linen curtains I picked myself. There's no industrial buzz, no clipboard of orders waiting, just a kettle, a notebook, and quiet. Every morning, I light the same lavender candle, the one Mom gave me after everything broke. The scent has changed slightly, or maybe I have. The walls are filled with photos, not awards, not magazine clippings. Mom stirring soup, me barefoot laughing in flour. The first group of young women I mentored, elbows deep in doe eyes, wide with purpose. There's peace in this version of life, but not stillness. Rooted Table is growing, not fast, but fully. Last week, a client asked for a tasting with no twists, no flash, just food that remembers where it came from. I brought rosemary lamb. Of course I did. She took one bite, closed her eyes, and said, "This tastes like someone finally told the truth." I didn't say anything, just poured her more tea. Because some truths don't need retelling, just repeating. A few days ago, I got a letter, handwritten, no return name. Inside, a check, sizable, enough to fund the next mentorship cycle, plus a new oven. And one line, "I've said enough, let this speak instead." I folded the note slowly, didn't cry, didn't scoff, just breathed. Because even guilt, when silent and sincere, can still build something. I never responded, didn't need to. Some chapters don't require closure, only distance. That afternoon, I walked to the community garden, the same bench where I'd watched the first rooted table dinner bloom. I sat in the sun, watched 3 young chefs arrange herbs by scent not name, and I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I hadn't disappeared. I had reappeared on my terms. Rooted, restored, and finally mine. Sometimes I wonder if I could speak to the woman I was 5 years ago. What would I say? Not the version on stage, not the one holding the microphone with shaking hands, but the one curled on the kitchen floor, after the erasure, after the silence, after the lie became louder than her own name. I think I'd tell her this: you're not broken, you're buried, and what's buried can grow. I'd tell her it's okay to walk away from what you built if what you built no longer honors you. I'd tell her some people will take your recipes, your language, your laughter, and serve it with their smile. But they can't take your hands, or the way your mother taught you to taste, or how your stories settle in people's bones, not just their mouths. I'd tell her, your voice is not a microphone, it's a rhythm, and even if no one hears it for a while, you're still singing. Legacy isn't loud, it's not gold-plated. It doesn't sit on shelves behind glass. It's passed down, through burned fingertips, through handwritten notes and margins, through meals made when you have nothing left but salt and time. And healing, it doesn't come from closure, it comes from creation. Each woman you feed, each girl you teach, each flavor you reclaim. That is your justice. That is your proof. That is your survival made sacred. Now when I walk through Rooted Table's kitchen, I don't think about Rachel. I think about Miriam, a 24-year-old pastry cook who writes poetry on napkins. About Diane, a 52-year-old mother of 4 who finally started her own jam line. About Keisha, who said, "This is the first time I've ever been paid to be myself." That's the legacy I want. Not revenge, not vindication, but echoes that become voices, that become stories, told at tables I'll never sit at but helped build. So if someone ever asks me, "What did you do with your pain?" I'll answer, I seasoned it, I served it, and I made sure no one ate alone again. Last week we hosted an open kitchen night. No tickets, no press, just food and stories. Each woman brought a dish and a memory, some sweet, some burnt, all honest. We strung lights across the rafters, played vinyls from a donated record player, laughed too loud, cried without shame. A guest stood up mid-meal, holding a plate of ginger chicken, and said, "I never thought food could make me feel seen." Everyone clapped. No one asked for credentials. No one needed to. That night, I passed around a notebook, the same one I used to draft my comeback, the one with rosemary smudges on page 1. At the top of the last blank page, I wrote, "Tell us how you came back." And one by one, they did. I didn't read the entries until days later. Some were only 2 sentences, others full paragraphs. But every line pulsed with survival. One read, "I left him, and then I made lemon cake." Another, "They said I'd never lead. Now I host Sunday dinners for 12. I cried in my office, not because they were broken, but because they weren't. Because women rebuild, even after being erased, even after giving everything and being left with crumbs. They rebuild with salt, and aprons, and grief that turns into garlic butter on a warm plate. At the bottom of the last entry, someone had written, "I didn't know my story had value until I heard yours." I copied that line onto a sticky note and stuck it to my fridge, right beside a photo of me and Mom, hands covered in flour, both of us laughing like we'd just remembered who we really were. This isn't a fairy tale ending, no parade, no villain punished, no grand reveal. It's just a woman whole again, standing in her own kitchen, her name intact, her voice quiet but unshakable. So if you're listening from a small town or a big city, from a silence you didn't choose, from a kitchen where no one claps, know this: you are not too late, you are not too small, and you are never truly forgotten. Tell your story. Write your name back in. The table's set. There's a seat waiting. It always was. Have you ever been written out of a story you helped build? Have you stayed silent not because you were weak, but because you were waiting for the right moment to rise? If the story found you at the right time, share your own below, not for drama, but for dignity, for truth, for closure. Where are you listening from? What did this story remind you of? And if no one's told you this today, you still belong at the table. Subscribe to Ian Reddit's story for more real stories about justice, healing, and quiet power after 35. Your story isn't over, and neither is hers.